Welcome. I'm very pleased to welcome Sean Adam as my guest today. Sean is Vice President of Market Strategy and Innovation with AFL. Sean, thank you very much for joining us and spending some time.
Appreciate it, Patrick. Always look forward to catching up with you.
Very apropos, your title, VP of Market Strategy and Innovation. I'd like to bring both elements into today's conversation. Some about the market, some about innovation. If ready to get started, I've got a few questions for you.
Very cool. Let's go.
Thanks. I understand, Sean, that you're optimistic about the current year, 2024, being a year of growth. Not every analyst sees it that way. So, can you tell us what your optimism comes from for the current year that we're in?
Sure. It isn't at all surprising that analysts kind of are on the fence of because there just remains a whole lot of uncertainty. But as we look at as we kind of look at the markets and the markets we serve, we do see that there's areas of opportunity for investment growth in 2024. I don't think anyone would be surprised that the hottest area of growth is going to be in the AI space. It's what everybody's talking about, but guess what? It's also about where a lot of money's being spent. So the big players that are out there, they're literally in a virtual arms race with each other to see who's kind of really going to come out on top. And that's just going to drive a significant amount of infrastructure investment, certainly in the data center space, right? The sheer amount of megawatts being deployed is just absolutely mind-boggling. Never actually seen anything at such an accelerated pace in this area before. Another one is we actually think broadband is going to rebound.
Okay.
The general sense that kind of hit bottom in Q4 is what we ourselves feel, but you kind of also, as I talk to some other kind of industry analysts and experts, kind of the same thing, right? There's a bit of a growing optimism on kind of where we're gonna come out. It's going to be a slow return. It's when I say kind of AI is really accelerating, broadband's going to be this. I think we think kind of this slow crawl that kind of comes to the bottom, but at least we're at the bottom. Is our general sense. We're kind of getting some of those indicators of positivity. And then really the third area, and one where often people don't talk about it a lot, is what's going on in the U.S. electric grid.
The electric grid.
Yeah.
Wow.
Right. And I'm not sure a lot of people know the electric grid actually pulls through a bunch of optical infrastructure. Actually, AFL's kind of starting point where we were birthed, right, when it was Alcoa and Fujikura, was actually being the first provider of optical ground wire to the U.S. market, right? So
okay.
any high transmission lines you see, pretty much guaranteed there's optical ground wire from us that's in it here in the States. And if you look at kind of the utilities, they're just facing these challenges that are really driving them to need to kind of upgrade and transform their grid. You've got aging infrastructure, you've got impacts of climate change, you've got load growth, which over the last bunch of years has been kind of going down as we deploy things like LED lights and everything. That's turning around and starting to go back up, right? And then you kind of just have the general socioeconomic driver for green. And so as kind of all of that happens, it's forcing the grid to be much more complex than what it ever was before. And that actually requires a much more robust communication system. And then kind of what ends up just being really interesting is that, these are actually all interlinked, right? Kind of edge and AI data centers, well, they need better connections, so better broadband.
Sure.
But then those AI data centers, like I said, megawatts are just kind of growing at a mind-boggling pace. Well, that means you need more power, you need a more sophisticated grid, right? And then kind of overall, you've got just high-speed internet is really kind of changing overall work patterns. That also is putting demand on grid, right? You and I today are working from our homes, right? And so all of that really flows into the underlying fundamentals are strong, and there really are some bright spots for the year to come.
That's great. You've now got me optimistic about the year, so thank you for that. But you mentioned just a minute ago that, yeah, some economic observers are on the fence. and I brought it up in my first question to you. So wondered if I could be a little bit of a devil's advocate and ask if you see any headwinds that might face the optimism that you just described.
Absolutely. And there always are, right? There's always two sides to kind of every coin. And so there definitely are headwinds that are facing it. If I kind of think about what might be the bigger ones, high interest rates, the cost of capital, that's going to continue to be a challenge. We see that in a number really across all those industry spaces. That's a key issue. The availability of labor is going to be a strong limiter. It's we even saw things where in 2022 projects moved out and they moved out because there wasn't enough labor to go do them. And so that's something you and I have chatted about, a number of times, right? You guys yourselves did specifically a survey that talked about the what did the labor market look like in supporting of these types of builds, and the fact that a lot of people are retiring. There's not enough people coming in. There's not enough skilled labor. So that's a key limiter. And it'll be interesting because it will be labor probably is one of those arbiters that will actually kind of figure out what do the growth curves look like. Right. I would actually say labor is one of the biggest ones to kind of understand, is there a bit of a flattening of the curve? And this might sound a bit odd, but I would actually say that the growth in broadband is heavily tied to federal stimulus. You might say, well, isn't that actually a tailwind? I think it certainly is, right? To actually have $43.5 billion from BEAD. There's probably about another roughly 50 billion out there in the various other programs, from the capital project funds to enhanced ACAM. There's a lot of money out there. Where it actually becomes a headwind is it's really hard to navigate. And a lot of the folks that are going to be the builders of the networks are really the ones that are best geared to figure out how to navigate the ins and outs of kind of the federal stimulus program. So those are kind of the bigger headwinds that I see.
Sean, thanks for that insight into sort of what's ahead in the current year, tailwinds, headwinds, how it's all going to come together. A follow-up question to that, on the idea that there will be growth this year, anticipating that growth, how do you foresee the demand for optical fiber evolving, to support the types of data needs, the types of connectivity requirements that you've described? What's that demand going to look like in the current year?
Sure. I think kind of a good place to start, Patrick, is to really kind of look at what happened kind of this year in 2023. Overall, optical cable demand contracted probably somewhere north of 15% this year. And for the fact that we've been on a run for the last couple of years where we've had kind of year-over-year growth, it's been a nice run. But last year that really kind of came to a halt, and we're down 15% this year. And so, but as I mentioned before, we do actually predict that there's kind of this long journey back, recovery in 2024, most specifically in the broadband space. And so as we look at that, kind of in 2024, we think kind of optical demand is probably going to grow somewhere on the order of 5 to 6%, which means we're still not out of the hole, but at least we've started coming up out of it. Right. Really, what you'll start to see is 25 and onward is going to where we're going to start to see, we think, kind of double-digit growth for optical cable, really driven by kind of the BEAD funding coming online strongly. And so kind of peak demand is going to be probably in that 26, 27 timeframe. Mm-hmm. And that's certainly going to be key. And I kind of talk a lot about broadband as being that kind of the driver for optical demand and optical cable demand. And that's because it really is, right? AI is definitely consuming a lot of optical cable. We talked about the grid. It's consuming optical cable. Nobody actually consumes it like the carriers consume it to deploy the broadband access networks.
Excellent. Thanks, Sean. For my final question, I'd like to come through on the promise or the threat to ask you questions about innovation, and wonder specifically, are there specific trends, specific developments in optical fiber technology, maybe in connectivity as well, that you believe will be really pivotal in the year ahead, especially considering the demands and sort of the changes that you've talked about so far?
Sure, sure. Yeah. So as I kind of think about it, density kind of comes to top of mind, and really actually density impacting both the AI space and the broadband space, though in slightly different ways. If we look at AI, the we talked about the kind of the megawatt growth being significant. Going along with that is just the sheer level of connection density that is really kind of growing at an exponential pace, right? Of really how many connections need to get made within these high performance compute clusters. And so there, you've got innovation being really done by kind of the connector manufacturers, whether that's kind of a US Connect or a Senko, driving those kind of small form factor multi-fiber connectors. That's a key innovation space because it's all about how do I fit more connections onto that front panel. Density, as well, as I said, kind of has a play in broadband. If we think about the fact that, how do I make my dollars go further? You can sit there and say $43.5 billion, that's a whole lot of money. But you see the states themselves are already saying, you gave us $1 billion, but that's not enough, right, to really achieve your universal coverage. And so a way that kind of addressing the density problem helps there is, if there's existing ductwork that I can use, because I can actually, blow a very, small OD high density cable down that. I don't have to dig, right? I don't have to. So it saves me money. It saves me in time. Means that I can leverage that existing infrastructure. If I'm taking up less space on the pole, it's easier to permit. It's easier to fit. I don't actually have to go replace the poles, right? So there's a lot that happens where density kind of helps the dollar go further in the broadband space. And then kind of finally, as we chatted, we got one of the headwinds I talked about is really being the labor, right? And that kind of being the throttle on growth overall in all of these spaces, right? Is kind of advancements that are happening both in the optical fiber and cable space and the optical connectivity space and the equipment space on how do you really enable the workforce, right? How do you help them be more effective, more efficient, decrease the level of skill as new folks come on? What can we do to help them be kind of quicker to be able to kind of deliver on the demand that we have? And you and I have chatted about that, in years before, right? Around what are those steps that can be taken? And so, you look at kind of modern flexible ribbon, like our wrapping tube cable and our spider ribbon, the significant throughput that can come along with mass fusion splicing, right? That's a key. Making that splicer simpler and easier to use. Making the test equipment so it's a single button push of testing. There's advancements really across the board from the infrastructure pieces all the way up to the tools to deploy them that really the industry is focused on. Make that simpler such that the labor is less of a challenge, because that really will put the throttle on the rest of the growth.
Excellent. And I think it's worth pointing out that these technological developments you talk about are in place. These aren't things that need to be developed in 2024 to meet the coming demand. The work has been done, the effort has been made, the R&D has been put in. AFL and poised to meet these demands coming up. Sean, thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you, Patrick.